Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Lauren Windsor, independent journalist and documentarian here in studio. Lauren, welcome back.
Thanks, Reed. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So, I had a whole other group of things I want to talk to you about, and we will get to them. But before we do that, Matt Gaetz has pulled out. It's the only joke I'm going to make. But not surprising. You have a particular history with Mr. Gaetz. As I recall, there is video of you chasing him down the street in Washington, D.C., asking if he's a pedophile.
Yes, this was outside of the DOJ, actually.
Right.
They were doing a press conference in support of the January 6th defendants. It was him and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I believe Louis Gohmert was there, too.
Oh, my.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy day.
The Three Musketeers. And so as it turns out, there are now multiple allegations of him actually sleeping with underage girls, which are not new, but have sort of come back to light because of this ethics report that I assume, will probably eventually get out because there's just no it's 2024. There's no possible way. So he'll go. He already retired from Congress. We should remember this is his dad is a very, very wealthy guy. It was, I think, president of the state Senate down in Florida. So it's not like Matt had ever come from the poorhouse and certainly isn't going back there anytime soon. So, maybe he'll get appointed to Marco Rubio's seat. Maybe he'll go run for governor because Florida is basically Bavaria on the beach now. But, I don't feel like this was probably even a real surprise to the Trump people that he wasn't ever going to make it anywhere close to a Senate hearing.
Maybe the people around Trump. I think Trump himself thought he was just going to muscle it through. He's like coming off this, I have a mandate, right? Like everyone just rushed to say he's a mandate. And of course, his popular vote number is, going down and down and down. I think he thought he was going to muscle it through.
But, you and I were texting when the news came out. It's not as if because Gaetz won't be the attorney general that the next options in line are better.
Oh, no, I think the next option that would be much worse in my mind is Ken Paxton, because he's had experience litigating and he's been through a massive corruption scandal and came out the other side. And this was a prosecution by Republicans in Texas.
Right. And he's the attorney general of Texas. They tried to impeach him or throw him out. And his wife is also a state senator. And as I recall, remind me if this was accurate, that somewhere in the midst of the trial or whatever you call it down there, that was it a donor or somebody called all these, or maybe it was even Trump called all these senators are like, if you throw him out, you're all done.
Oh, they were definitely threatening all the Republicans. I believe the majority leader, Dade Phelan, this is a guy who's very, very conservative, very MAGA. And so if he's leading the charge on a corruption, trial against Ken Paxton, it should tell you like how crazy these, charges must have been, like how much proof there must have been for them to hold this trial. Right.
And, Paxton has been under federal indictment himself for a number of years, I think for some shady stock deals. I think there were some whistleblower complaints against him from his now former staff about what a POS he is. And so, again, he would be logically the next in line. Then you also have goons like Mike Davis and some other people who have been sort of trolling around, maybe because
I don't think Mike Davis, though, he's tweeting out now about all of the possible replacements for Gaetz, and in his own name, he's not including that. He's saying like, I'm not involved in that. The first one in his list was like Mark Paoletta, who's like, Clarence Thomas's bestie. But as much as Mark Paoletta is one of these
Federalist Society,
Lunar Leo folks, I think he's probably still too timid. He's not someone who I think he's not a firebrand. And I really think that that's what Trump is looking for. And that's why I say Ken Paxton, because I think that he's shown himself to be a firebrand.
Well, and because as we saw when he was so upset with Jeff Sessions the first time, is he expects the attorney general to be his lawyer and to carry out his orders, which obviously famously the the norms. We were watching the Jon Stewart video before we started filming. The norms. Oh, well, the DOJ is supposed to be independent. The Attorney General is supposed to do this. And Trump's like, none of that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't assume whether or not it's the AG, the deputy AG, the head of the civil division, the head of the criminal division. None of these people are going to be otherwise, quote unquote, normal. That, maybe they'll have some qualification because they'll need one to get through the Senate. But it seems to me now that, okay, you've got Gaetz out. Right now, the Senate can say, okay, we did our job. The Republican senators can say, we did our job. We made sure the worst wasn't going to happen. Ken Paxton, he's not so bad.
Perhaps, but, I think it's still going to be pretty hard to get him confirmed.
Right, which goes back to the whole idea of recess appointments and adjourning Congress and all this other silliness, which, again, I think is one of those things where, and look, I game planned it a lot with different groups throughout 2024. Those things seem doable, and I assume they are if you're really willing to do it, right? And that's the thing too, is we have to see from Trump, which is at some point it wasn't, maybe Gaetz said I'm out, but my guess is somebody told him he had to go.
Well, it was like 45 minutes, I think, prior to him making the announcement. CNN had reached out to him about a second instance.
Yeah, so that is what it is. And, I try and remind myself, because I think, and this is, I want to segue into the work that you've done in the documentary that you produced, is, for all of the hullabaloo here in Washington, D.C., where we are, and on social media, the truth is that most folks in the country haven't heard of Matt Gaetz. They probably, don't know who most of the cabinet officers are. Frankly, I don't know who most of the cabinet officers are. You know why? Because it doesn't really matter. And if you are doing what you need to do, unless you have some specific connection to the Department of Agriculture, like how much does the Department of Agriculture affect your life? It probably does, but not to the extent that you have to say, oh, I really appreciate Secretary so-and-so doing their job today. And so I think that's one thing to remind ourselves too, is how distant and how disconnected a lot of this stuff is from the average American, but also, and look, you and I were just talking about this in the green room before, how exhausted everybody is too. I think there's, we're worn out because we've been at it for so long. But voters are very clear, like, I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to do this right now. We made a decision. Let's try and move forward.
And I actually think that a lot of voters would like to see the bureaucracy blown up.
Yeah.
And so to the degree that these picks are radical and, dangerous.
Right. It feeds the beast.
They might actually yes, hell yeah, that's exactly what I voted for.
Right.
Let's blow this shit up.
Yeah.
I've told you before, never underestimate the public's desire to burn down Washington. I mean, we're such I think, I don't want to say traditionalist because I wouldn't consider myself a traditionalist, but I have a deep respect for major institutions that make up our government. And these are the type of people that have no respect for those
institutions. You're so
old-fashioned.
But that's sort of the predicate of Trump's whole thing going back to the get-go, which was the system is screwing you. It probably is.
Yeah.
And you're angry to be right. You're right to be angry about it. You're right to be frustrated. You're right to say, I do want something completely different. I mean, I was talking to somebody earlier today. I mean, you could make an argument, Lauren, that but for COVID, Trump would be finishing his second term now. Now, whether or not he'd leave is a whole other story, but think about that. I mean, it really was all of a confluence of things that just barely got Biden over the line 4 years ago, and then it sort of snapped back to Trump has changed, Democrats are status quo, Trump has changed, status, and I think to me that, the status quo versus different, new, whatever is really the strike point more than inflation. Yeah, okay, people say inflation because that's what they're hearing all the time. Inflation. The truth is they don't really like anybody. And Trump is the person, if you're not going to like somebody, he's going to be your tribune.
We've seen change elections really, I don't want to say starting with 2008, but Obama was the change candidate, right? It was supposed to be Hillary that was going to win this, right? And then Obama won, I think, really giving people hope that there was going to be massive change to this structure where Wall Street and old school Washington were just working, in lockstep with each other. And then that wasn't really delivered. Did Obama win again? Yeah, but because Republicans put up Mitt Romney, they put up a Wall Streeter, right, who was really out of touch. And then, in 2016, I think there was still Hillary represented the status quo,
right, more of the same.
Yeah. And so, and Donald Trump is coming along and he's saying, like, I'm going to blow all this up. I'm going to fight for you.
Right.
And in an environment where, we talk about this in my documentary, Gonzo for Democracy, a big segment of the work is about factory towns.
Yeah.
And factory towns are these deindustrialized manufacturing communities,
Right.
like exurban towns, where, they were really harmed by NAFTA. They
Right.
were really harmed in the 2008 financial crisis.
Right.
And a lot of these communities never recovered. And I just think that, there's so much distrust between both parties that anybody who can come in and say, I'm going to blow the whole system up
Right.
and be willing to do it, I think that that's actually really preferable for a lot of people.
What's indicative? I mean, so first of all, I was lucky enough to be a part of your film, and thank you for that. But when I saw the screening in LA with you, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, what I was really struck by was, it's sort of a story of how we got to where we are. And the thing about the Factory Towns project that you put together at the beginning, and you have, the former governor of Ohio, and you have a bunch of folks. What struck me was when these were factory towns, they were also union towns. And when the factory closed and the union jobs left, in my experience and my analysis, the Democratic Party sort of left with them and left this just vacuum. Now, maybe there was some hangover of voters voting big D Democrat for the next several years. But once Republicans sort of got their act together, and we saw that in the 90s and the 2000s with Gingrich and the Contract for America and sort of just nationalizing everything, and then Alec and the Koch brothers and everything else, right? They are predatory. They went in and took those places over, really much the way that they were sort of proto-Trump in that way, which they said, you have been left behind. And these people are like, yeah, we have. And so now, I've said this to several people, we're sort of like running out of real estate here, Lauren. Like, we're going to have to go retake some territory, right, for the Republic if we want. Otherwise, if all you need to do now is say, I'm ready to blow it up, well, frankly, this Republican Party is much better at that than this Democratic Party, because this Democratic Party understands that that's fundamentally not good for everybody, right? That there will be a lot of damage that comes with that. And they're also, I think, constitutionally unwilling to even say it.
Well, the fundamental thing the Democratic Party needs to face is, they're so inclined towards nuance and incrementalism. And people are consistently voting for radical change. And this goes back to the Jon Stewart video again,
Right.
is, don't be the needle threaders.
Yeah.
Like, you need to find the loopholes and just run through them. Like,
Right.
use whatever lever of power you have to get the job done to make people's lives better. And I think that the Democratic Party is just really at a big crossroads,
Right.
and generationally, because they've really, the leadership has been a gerontocracy.
Yeah.
They've been in power for decades, and they're later in years. And I'm not saying this to be ageist, but there's this abiding respect for the institutions in a way that is out of step with the current zeitgeist. And so I think younger generations like deeply feel the angst,
Right.
that is pervading society, and they're more willing to do dramatic things and try to enact radical reforms, and we need that.
Well, I mean, I would say this too. You take Gen Z voters, what we call them, younger voters in their 20s, early 20s. They have seen a lot of stuff in their young lives, right? Maybe the first thing they remember is the great financial crisis. They've been called Generation Lockdown because there's for too many of them, they either have been in a school shooting or they know someone who's been in a school shooting. It is not some idea, right? It is a real thing. I mean, my daughter was just working on her first op-ed for a class. I mean, gun violence is the number one killer of kids and teens in the United States. I mean, that's a whole other show. But the point is, like, if that's how you've only ever seen your country, right? If you only know that it's harder to get a job, it's harder to make money, it's harder to buy a house, it's harder to do all that stuff, then what fealty do you have to the system that has brought all this to your doorstep, if that makes sense?
Right. And there's not. And so I think that Democrats, I'm hopeful that with this loss, it will mean that there's some serious introspection. But when you have somebody like David Axelrod throw Rahm Emanuel's name into the ring to lead the DNC, it's really discouraging. I have faith that he's not going to run the DNC.
Yeah, I mean, I've asked about that, and everybody's like, "Oh, he's a hard ass. He gets stuff done. He can raise a lot of money." I'm like, I get it, right? I get it, but that's not the point. Money isn't your issue. You had plenty of money. You had lots of money. Had lots more money than Trump did. Not your issue. As much as everybody complains about campaign finance, Democrats are never short of money. It's usually Republicans that are short of campaign cash. Now, the difference is they have an entire apparatus that goes 24/7, 365 that keeps them going, whereas Democrats really, like the mainstream media, is gone.
The constellation of nonprofits on the right, though, is like unparalleled.
Exactly, and all of the podcasts and everything else. Like, again, as I've tried to say to folks repeatedly, Joe Rogan is not the top of the funnel. Joe Rogan is the bottom of the funnel. He's not even really in it because he's just sort of who he is. Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, Dan Bongino, like they are all funded by millionaires and billionaires who've been working on this for decades, right? And they're the tail end of it. But but all of those things, and I had Taylor Lorenz on the show a couple of weeks ago. She made a really good point, which is, here's something too, is that all of those interest groups and all of those donors and all of the politicians and all of the media personalities, they all share both ideological and economic views. So they're always in lockstep with one another. You throw the religion in as well. Whereas Democrats, in my observation over 5 years, have trouble agreeing on anything. But I think your point is a better one, which is you have a group of younger voters who feel disconnected. You have clearly a bunch of what were, up until 2 weeks ago, core Democratic constituencies, i.e. Latinos and African Americans, right, who now are like, either I'm moving or I'm staying home, right? 2 million urban voters stayed home this year. That's not sustainable for a political party that's relying on black votes. And so from my perspective, like, you better figure something else out, because it ain't going to happen in the salons of the Upper West Side. It's not going to happen in a conference room at the DNC. It's not going to happen in some wealthy guy's house in Beverly Hills. If it doesn't happen in the country, literally in the country, if you don't get back to those roots, and so much of what your movie talked about, again, we're running out of real estate here. If you're losing AOC's district, you got problems.
Well, so in the lead up preparation for the documentary, I was taking this workshop at New York Film Academy, and one of the shorter films that I made was an interview with a young black man, probably young 30s. He, I would not have expected him to be a Trump supporter. Right. He was a bartender and musician, and I had gotten stuck in the bar for some reason.
You got stuck in the bar?
Well, no, I locked my keys in the trunk of my car. It was a whole fiasco.
That'll be in the after show.
It was a cluster of crazy. I was stuck there waiting on like 4 different locksmiths to come. Right. But we've been filming. It was on a filming day. And so one of my group partners was there, and we were just, holding down the fort. And so we started talking about politics. And something just told me in the conversation. He didn't have to come out and say it. I was like, oh, this is like the mythical like black Trump voter.
Yeah.
I was like, you support Trump, don't you? And he was like, yeah. I was like, did you vote for him? He's like, well, I didn't vote for him, but I would, if the election were today, I would vote for him. And as we're talking, he's telling me that he voted for Obama.
Yeah.
And so this is someone who voted for Obama and now supports Trump. And we set up, my interview film at his apartment, and, went through a long discussion about it. And he, this is someone who you wouldn't expect at all to be a Trump supporter. And he's winning over these, young black males, young Latino males. And a lot of it's predicated on religion and social mores and, this idea of a dying American dream.
Yeah.
And I know just from my many years now, like I got my start as an Occupy activist, but I launched a web show with the Young Turks called The Undercurrent. And I was going to, Tea Party events, and there was so much convergence between Tea Party and Occupy, and so much of it was the death of the American dream. That everyone's been sold on this idea that if you just, do the right things, you get a degree,
Right.
you work 40 hours a week, that you're going to have like a decent place to live. You can
Right.
have, a family and kids and a dog with a picket fence. And most people aren't like looking to be rich and famous. They're just looking to like not struggle
Right.
all the time. And we're at in America right now where everyone is struggling, a lot of times under the weight of student loan debt. They might have multiple degrees. I know that, I was struggling out in LA before Occupy. I had a degree and I'm out there, trying to find work, and it's expensive and it's hard and you have to hustle. And I think whatever party can actually speak to that the
Right.
most and actually address it the most, like Trump is speaking to it.
Yeah.
He's not fixing it. People think he's fixing it because they see the stock market go up. That's just rich people. Like,
But also it's
the stock market is not the economy.
But it's also the idea of feeling listened to, of being seen.
Yeah.
And I think that was the thing. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did this thing where there were a lot of Trump voters in her district, and they said, why did you vote for him and for me? You hear us. You're like us. You talk to us. You care about us. And she said, he talks to people. He says, even in that ad, right, that's gotten so much play, he is for you, right? Not for them, for you. And she said, we need to be in the second person more, saying, I am for you. And again, that's a very direct statement. It seems simple, and it is, unless you're afraid to actually talk to someone, because if you don't really have a plan for them, now you mentioned student debt. I take the flip side of the student debt discussion, which is 68% of the country doesn't go to college. Right.
I paid off my student loans, and so I like have some angst about like wanting to pay off other people's student loans.
As well you should. And that's normal. And that's my point, is if that is a hill you're going to die on policy-wise, you're by definition telling a whole bunch of people, either who have paid off their loans or who are never going to go to school, wait. Are you for me or are you for them? And that's the other part that Trump does so well and his people do so well, is that just divisiveness right down the middle, which is you're with me or you're with them. And he says, here's who I am. Take me or leave me. Here's who they are. And to your point, the Democrats are over there knitting, right? Not punching the donut. And I think that's important. And I think that's, I think we forget, and you've done this, right, in all of your undercover stuff, is politics is performance. Right? It is a show. I hate Trump's show, but he puts it on day in and day out. Look, we started the show talking about a ridiculous figure, not going to be attorney general, but all of the ridiculous figures that might be, right? He has 100% captured the body politic and the thinking of otherwise normal people. And it's exhausting. And that's part of the plan, is to wear you out. Because you and I were talking like 4 more years of talking about this guy. 4 more years of talking about this guy. And the thing is that, we have to learn to walk and chew gum, which is we have to see what he's doing. We have to call out the worst of what he's doing. And now we have to go back into the field and we have to figure out how to get these voters back. Because I was talking to a woman who's an activist. She lives in Minnesota now, but she was in Michigan. She spent 6 straight weeks in Michigan. And she said the sense she got going door to door, Lauren, was, these are her words, quote, I didn't feel like the Democrats even had standing, that they weren't even eligible to make the argument. And I thought that was really profound in my mind, because this is someone who's raised a lot of money in small dollars, not in big dollars, but in small dollars, gone to every door she could go to. And when she gets to the door, she feels like, I'm not even sure they want to believe anything I have to say. And that's a more fundamental problem, which I have said repeatedly, is, why do you have a problem with messaging? Because you guys can't figure out what you believe in.
I don't know that that's the case. Since I got involved in Democratic politics, the perennial complaint is Democrats can't message. It's not that they can't message. It's that, they're not as willing to be as straightforward as Republicans are.
Right.
They want to make everything nuanced. And things are nuanced in governance. The problem is that the average voter doesn't, it's not persuasive nuance. From a political standpoint, if you want a message, you need to make things as black and white as possible. It's this or it's that.
Right.
You're drawing contrasts.
Right.
And, I guess for me, the real sort of bellwether with the campaign, knowing like,
Mhm.
yeah, and I knew it was always going to be close, but when I
Right.
saw this ad, I was like,
Yeah.
like, the Trump ad, it said, no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime.
Right.
Really straightforward. Can any of it happen? Probably not,
Right.
because I don't think he can get that through Congress. But that's not the point.
Right.
The point is that he's telling you, like, this is what I'm going to try to do.
Right.
Or at least I'm going to say I'm going to try to do it.
Right.
Democrats won't even say that because they'll be like, well, we can't. Is that something that's actually possible?
Right.
Because, I mean, we have to get that passed through Congress, and someone is going to hold us to that. And we can't make we certainly can't message a promise we can't deliver on.
Right.
And it's like, no. We need to go out and we need to say,
Right.
like, we're gonna get Medicare for all.
Right.
Like, we're gonna get a public option.
Right.
People are going to come back and on it later.
Right.
But if you tell people like, hey, healthcare is bullshit and we're going to break the system, to a lot of people, that sounds like amazing.
Well,
Great, let's do that.
but this is also the fundamental difference between campaigning and governing, right? I'm a campaign guy. I like campaigns. I like the dynamism. I have ADD, so I like the short-term nature of them.
You do have ADD.
Right. But governance is hard. Governance is slow. Governance is sausage making. That's what it's supposed to be. But the difference is that when you say no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, what you're saying from a value proposition is I am for the person who doesn't have millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I am for the person who is working a shift, who is working till 2 or 3 in the morning, right? That's the value proposition of that statement. Whether or not it has any reality or possibility in policy, the value proposition is I'm for you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's to your point, which is like, you don't have to soft sell people. Just tell them what you want to do for them. Because to your point, if you have a whole litany of social issues that you care about as a campaign or as a party, that those things are either A, never on someone's list, or B, are so far down their list because, again, they are worried about working till 3 o'clock in the morning or paying their rent or whatever it is. Like, it's never like that's not enough. That's not enough because it's not that those things don't matter. It doesn't mean that they're not important. It means that to the average person who's just trying to make it through the day, that's a luxury.
It all goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right, exactly. Yes, the hierarchy of needs. But when we were targeting, soft Republicans on things like NATO, right? NATO is a problem for you if you have time to worry about NATO. Now, it's a problem for all of us if things go sideways, but the point is, if you say, I'm really worried about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and what's going to happen if Donald Trump gets reelected, like your hierarchy of needs is pretty far up the pyramid already, right?
Yeah.
Unless you've got a son or daughter in the military. But for the most part, you're probably suburban. You probably went to college. You probably make a pretty good living, right? Your kids go to a good school. Those are all the things that we saw where those were the Republicans we were trying to target. The issue is that like we had trouble getting them across the line for Biden. I think we also had trouble getting them across the line for Harris. But what our working theory was, the Democrats had to get their nominee to the 2-yard line and we could get them to the end zone. But they got to the 9, right? So it didn't matter. Like we weren't going to ever find enough otherwise non-Republican or independent votes to make up that delta. And I think that's a big problem too, to your point, is not about the soft Republicans that didn't come across the line, but why did 20 million Democrats stay home?
Yeah, I mean, in the closing weeks of the campaign when she's touring around with Liz Cheney and
right.
He's a threat to democracy. He's a threat to democracy. He's a fascist. Like, the polling shows that a majority of people don't know what an authoritarian is. Like,
no, it doesn't roll off the tongue.
People don't know what autocracy is. If you call him a fascist, like, okay, what's a fascist?
Right.
Like, I remember saying, and maybe it was tweeting, maybe it was to my partner, but where's the economic argument? Why
Right.
aren't we talking more about this? There was so much steam in the movement
Yeah.
before the convention, and then all of the traditional consultants
Yeah,
really
for
like
sure.
had their way like after the
100%.
convention, after the DNC in August, and you could see a marked shift in tone.
Oh,
And even though she was packing these arenas, I think definitely uh, there was some lack of enthusiasm.
no, look, I mean, we went from Brat Summer and Charlie XCX to basically like Peter, Paul, and Mary, right? Like it was just, you could almost feel the energy go out of the thing, right? I don't know if it was after the convention or if it was after the debate. The other part of it too was I feel like, yes, I think there was absolutely a traditional consultant part of it. And then I think also they got into the idea of like play not to lose. Right?
Yes.
They're so far up after
Risk averse. It was
risk
like, we're
averse,
not going
risk
to take any
averse.
risks.
Right, which of course is like in football is like the prevent defense. It never works. The only thing the prevent defense prevents is victory because you give up big chunks of yardage and then you're like, oh God, now we have to get our act together because they're so close. And I think that's exactly what happened. Now, of course, there were so many other headwinds, right? And I do think that Harris as a candidate did the best she could given the circumstances. I don't think her campaign did the best by her. But I thought she did the best she could.
I thought she did a fantastic job for the situation.
Yeah, right.
Does that mean that it was flawless? No. And I think it's really detrimental to the party when people go out and say she was a flawless candidate. This was only a result of sexism and racism.
Even Carville said, like, that's not new to us, right? That's not new to our country.
You know, the country is very racist, but we elected Barack Obama. So we need to be more nuanced in our thinking about how like sexism and racism like affects voters, because
Right.
I think people care about it. But at the end of the day, it's the whole like, yeah, he's an asshole, but he's our asshole.
Was it last week or the week before? Like you posted something like, hey guys, keep up screaming at the white guys, right? We sort of need them to win elections. And you got pretty roasted. But, you know, I think the broader point of what you were saying is elections are binary choices. You must get more votes to win them. There's no such thing as addition by subtraction.
Voters are not obligated to vote for you. It's your obligation as a politician, as a party, to give them reasons to vote for you.
Right.
Like you need to make the argument. Like no one owes you their vote. And so just like all of this screaming about, you know, white women and white guys, like were these ever constituencies that belong to the Democratic Party? Because, you know, I can have all the conversations in the world with family and friends, but I live in DC and I spend a lot of time in California. Like, if we're not investing in swing states and you know, so-called red states, if we don't have infrastructure there, if we're not investing in organizing white people there, they're not going to vote for us.
Right.
Like, when I go home, when I've been home to Tennessee or it's online, like I engage people in conversations about politics. I have lost family and friends because of conversation about politics. I'm estranged from my brother because of conversations about Black Lives Matter. So what conversations am I supposed to have with him after we no longer speak because of it?
Right.
Like, that's not enough. White people having conversations with other white people is not enough. You've got to invest in organizing and you've got to actually deliver.
Right.
Like deliver something that people can say, yeah, you know what? That really, that benefited me. That
right.
I can see how you changed something that helped me.
Right. Or at least tell the story better of what you've done. Because I think Biden did get a lot done, all things considered, with Republican votes. Right. And as I was telling somebody who maybe I was having breakfast with, you know, when I worked for George W. Bush in his first term, if the president went out and gave a speech, whatever it was about, right? Let's say we did one on like home ownership in Iowa once, right? First thing, everyone on the Republican side of the aisle and Republican media says this is the greatest speech that's ever been given. It was on a Tuesday at 2:00 Central Time. Nobody watched it. Nobody ever heard it, but it was the greatest speech ever. The second thing is, if they had passed a big deal, a big bill of whatever it was, or had gotten a big thing done, they would literally deploy every cabinet and sub-cabinet officer into key states and congressional districts day in and day out to talk about how this was getting done, right? And this, I think, also goes to a big part of it, which is Jess Piper from Missouri said, these states aren't red, they're uncontested. And I think that's a big part of this too, Lauren, is like half of life is showing up. If John Tester has just lost Montana, and as a party you say, we're never going back to Montana, just like you're never going back to the Dakotas, and you're never going back to Nebraska, right? And you're never going back to Missouri, and you're never going back to any of the states where you used to have Democratic senators, and now you don't, right? We're, again, as I said at the top, we're running out of real estate. We got to go find some people to talk to again. And I don't think they're unopposed. I don't think they're opposed to talking to us or talking to people. I think right now there's only, whether or not it's a podcast or a radio network or whatever it is, they're only hearing one side of things, and they're only seeing one group, and that group takes them 100% for granted.
There's a lot of things that are barriers for Democrats in these states. The infrastructure is not there. People to run for candidates aren't there. Maybe there's a lethargic sort of old school mentality, but you see like turnarounds in some of these swing states like Wisconsin, like North Carolina, where you have the youngest Democratic chair ever, Anderson Clayton. And, Ben Wickler was an organizer who was from Wisconsin, but he was working for Move On in D.C. and, moved back to Wisconsin, become the party chair. And they've really turned around the situation in those states through organizing,
hard
through
work,
making sure that they had a candidate for every race. That's just like bottom line. Like, we don't leave any race uncontested. And, it takes a lot of work to go out there and recruit candidates.
Right. But that is the job.
It is the job. But you also, it's often not paid very well. So that is another thing. Like, you're going into one of these state level organizing jobs. The pay isn't great.
Right.
And you're having to convince people to run for positions where the pay isn't great for those either.
Right.
It can be very hard and demoralizing to try to make that happen. But they did. I think this was the first time in, I don't know how many years, but I think Anderson got a candidate for every single race.
Right. And I have some friends who led an effort in the state of Virginia to do that, I think 3 or 4 cycles ago, for the state legislature, the state house, the state senate. And it worked. They ran someone everywhere, and voila, they took both chambers. Now, I think they've sort of bounced back and forth, but the whole idea before they came up with this idea of maybe we should run qualified candidates everywhere was like, oh no, we need 6 seats to flip it. Well, how many seats are you going to run in? 6. That's not how any of this works, right? Like, you're going to have to throw more darts than you think are going to land. But as we start to wrap up, I don't want to leave everybody with just sort of down in the mouth, because there's plenty of that. I mean, the one thing I would like to say is that I think that the good news in the clear wave of bad news is that for all of the stuff that, we're talking about with Republicans have all these communications channels and Trump and everything else, is remember that they've had to put all this time and all this money and all this effort and all this communication in to win by tens of thousands of votes in these places. They have to work a lot harder to keep people angry all day, every day, than a well-organized Democratic Party with good candidates everywhere would have to do to take it back. I really do believe that, because I think on any given day, especially now because so many of these candidates at the state and local level really are just MAGA nuts, that if you put an otherwise qualified, competent, confident Democrat up against a nut, you got an even money chance. Because you see, like in Washington 3, right? Marie Glusenkamp Perez, is that her name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, she wins again. You know why? Because she's like a normal person, and Joe Kent's a freak, right? Find normal people. They're going to put a freak up against them. Run good campaigns. They don't have to be consultant driven. They're not always going to have the most money. You're just going to have to outwork other people. And so to me, I think that's the thing, is right now, like, the boulder's on top of the hill, right? The Republicans, the Democrats were able to push it and came down. The Republicans have pushed it back up. And now, like, this next 4 or 5 years is really going to be the determinant, because if Democrats can get their groove back and start to catch some fire, get some stuff back, again, on the whole, we have seen that a lot of the stuff that Trump and all these guys were proposing is not popular. The problem is, if there's nothing to counter it, if you're not offering a vision, Lauren, for the country, right, then they're going to take what they've got. And I think that's what we saw. But I think there is opportunity. But again, we should not be under any misapprehension that it's going to take. The most important word to me is not fight and it's not resist. The most important word is work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just think that people have got to put their heads down. Democrats really need to do the work, organize in all of these places that have gone uncontested. And yeah, I think that when you make those investments, does it pay off immediately? No, but it will over time.
Right.
Are there mirages? Are there examples where they plowed a lot of money into places that just didn't work out? Look at Texas. Like every time we think that, someone's gonna
Right.
oust red state senator there in Florida. But the challenges that we're facing are only becoming, like, as a country,
Yeah.
that require good governance are only becoming, greater.
Right.
Climate change, like what's happening in Florida, migration. So I think that the overall
Yeah.
our government's woefully unequipped to handle it, but Republicans even more so because, they're anti-science and anti-government.
Yeah, they don't
So
care.
they want to slash everything, all of these things that would be buffers that, between like the worst disasters and,
Right.
the citizenry. And I think that as this becomes more and more exposed, like people actually
Right.
need government in order to change any of this. I do think that it's a real opportunity for Democrats to like step forward with a vision. They just have to be willing to fight for radical change, a
Right.
system that is not like, let's just incrementally like tweak things
Right.
at the edges.
No, because I mean,
You know?
we're really. I remember doing a meeting here in DC, pre-COVID, probably 2017, 2018. And I remember a guy talking about, well, since, in the post-war era. And I said, may I just stop you for a second? I'm like, the war ended 70 years ago, right? 75 years ago. Like, maybe it's time to accept that the post-war era is over, right? For a variety of factors. But I think that's right, which is, I see it in a couple of ways. You could make it pre 9/11, post 9/11, pre meltdown, post meltdown, pre COVID, post COVID. I think post COVID is probably the one where, like, the world as it was will never be again. That world is completely gone. And one thing I've thought about too now watching Trump is my Republican Party died the day he came down the escalator. And like maybe it took a while for the machine to stop beeping, but that was it. The party was over. Once he had decided that was where he was going to go and he rolled to victory in that 2015 primary, 2016 primary, that was it. And there was only so much holding back that wave. And again, we now have to, I gave this speech to the women in Orange County last week, is like, we have to stop being the people of anti, right? Like, I will always be never Trump because I think he is a terrible person. I think he has bad intentions for the country, but we all must be pro something else.
Yes, we have to have a reason, offer people a reason to vote for us. And
Yeah.
and I was speaking to that with the Kamala messaging in the final days of, being the anti-Trump and pro-democracy and
Right.
campaigning with the Cheneys. Like, I do believe that people yearn for bipartisanship. It's really demoralizing to the base to like go campaign with Liz Cheney, though. You talk about all the people who sat home, like give people a reason to vote for you.
Yeah, but if you've got if between your campaign and your super PAC, you're north of $2 billion, can't you walk and chew gum?
You can walk and chew gum, but she should have been, I would have liked to have seen her, going in with more union officials, like touring
Right.
around with Sean Fain,
Right.
rather than touring around with Liz Cheney. Like, do an event with Liz Cheney, but don't do like, let's have an event
Right.
in every battleground state. Like, chasing Republican women has not ever really proven to be a great strategy
Right.
for Democrats, because at the end of the day, Republican voters will vote for Republicans.
Right.
Why vote for Republican like light? Why not just vote for someone who is a Republican? It's very hard to bring them over.
Well, I think also that's also an indication of an assumption that the base would be there for you. Right.
Yeah, there was an assumption of that, but there were a lot of indicators that they weren't for, Gaza being, a prime example,
Right.
Particularly in Michigan. There were a lot of, missteps with the Gaza situation. She should have broken more with Biden, like going on I think it was on The View.
Right.
What would you do differently from Biden? And she said nothing. And
Right.
when you're it really had echoes of Hillary in 2015, 2016, when, everyone's complaining about the economy and everyone, no, the economy's much better than you think it is. Like, you're
Right.
never going to be able to argue against someone's lived experience.
Well, not only that, it was one of these things where the party did everything it could to get Joe Biden to not run. Basically telling him, sorry, Joe, you're not going to run for a second term. You're out now. And then they were afraid of hurting his feelings. Right? Like, if you've already told the old man you're pitching him off the deck, like, you might as well do what you feel like you need to do to win.
I mean, I'm pissed that it didn't happen, the year prior, right? Like,
yeah, but there's nothing we can do about that now.
No, for sure. But it really feeds into how serious are you about democracy if, you didn't actually have a primary for somebody and you just booted your candidate out. I had a lot of conversations with people where they were like, particularly, online with people on Facebook, from back home in Tennessee. It's like, you care so much about democracy. You really don't, obviously. Nobody ever voted for her.
Because that was, again,
you launched your own coup.
But because the bad guys are really good at this.
Yeah,
they recognized an opening and they took it.
Yes. And this is why, we've got to do the work to go in. I think at the end of the day that authenticity and actual science and reason and truth wins against lies every day of the week. It does. That's why it costs them so much more to win. Right? Because they have to convince people to vote against their own self-interests in a lot of ways.
Right. And and be told, if I said to you, Lauren, the sky is purple, and you're like, no, the sky is blue, but then I spend the next 6 years telling you, Lauren, the sky is purple, and that's all you ever hear, at some point you're going to look up and go, I love a purple sky, right? Purple skies are great. Well, on that note, Lauren, where can we find the documentary and where can we find you? If you still dare to tread in social media in these shark-infested waters, where are you?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Lauren Windsor. I know I refuse to call it X. I will still call it Twitter. I know a lot of people are fleeing, but the thing is, when we cede these platforms, then you're ceding the ground to your competitor, right? Yeah. So then everyone and it's not like Twitter is an exclusively political place. So then all of the people who are on the platform here is right-wing voices and nothing from a left perspective, a democratic, liberal, independent perspective. If everyone flees, I don't want to be in an echo chamber. I like the diversity of opinion. I like the debate. I like the fight. Let's have a debate on the facts. Come armed with reason and let's do this in the public square. Right. When we get into our echo chambers, everything,
Yeah. You get further and further away from actual human beings.
Yes. So at LA Windsor on Twitter, the website is theundercurrent.tv. And when you go there, you can subscribe to the blog there, or you can go to my website, laurenwindsor.com. But you can see where these different projects are and sign up for the email list, and you get updates on them. But you can see the movie from the YouTube embed on theundercurrent.tv.
As always, gang, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok at Reed Galen, on Blue Sky at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA, and on Substack, The Homefront. Please tune in, subscribe, do all the good stuff. And don't forget, Says Us, SEZ.us, the social media platform for sanity, if you're sick of all that other stuff. Lauren, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Reed. Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.